How to Know What to Say. Rick Boggs, Executive Director, The Accessible Planet. This segment, How to Know What to Say, was originally broadcast as part of an interactive webinar on do-it-yourself educational description, guidelines, and tools for teachers to improve access to video for blind students in the classroom. This webinar series is a project of the Smith-Kettlewell Video Description Research and Development Center and was produced by the Described and Captioned Media Program. You can find more information about this project at VDRDC.org and webinar.dcmp.org.
It really is an honor and a pleasure to be able to be part of this. It's very exciting what's going on at the VDRDC, and just to have any kind of be able to contribute in any way is absolutely my pleasure. What I'm going to be presenting here is really the culmination of a couple of years of work looking in detail at all of the various published standards and guidelines for audio description that we could find in the world, really. And I've rendered those, myself and a staff of people here, have rendered those down to some core principles that should provide guidance for you should you find yourself in a situation where you've got to do the description. This really is aimed at when description is not available for students that need it, and someone's got to step up and do it. How are you going to be able to do that? I'm hoping that I can provide something that will be valuable for you. What we start off with very quickly here, just as an overview. Again, some people wonder about terms. What is audio description versus video description, that kind of a thing. Well, if audio description is translating visual information into objective, unbiased words, then of course video description is a sort of a subset of that. Mm-hmm. The purpose of any kind of description really is just simply to do exactly that, to translate the essential, and that's kind of a critical word that we'll talk about here, the essential visual information that people who are blind or have low vision need. It also applies to anyone that can't see a screen, as we'll find there's probably general purposes for this. But in this context, someone that is unable to see the information on the screen, the function of audio description is just to be able to provide that information. So what we have is 10 general principles of audio description. These 10 principles would apply to any form of description. If you're describing a live event, if you're describing a stage play, a performance, if you're describing also video as well, but let's see, live event, video performance, exhibits, fine art, anything like that. These principles would be the principles that would apply to any form of audio description. Again, these rendered, what we did was we tried to find the common ground. You'll find that there are some discrepancies among what people think are the measures for quality audio, effective audio description. What I'm presenting here are the common ground. These are the things that we find everybody agrees on in terms of what makes description work, what makes it effective. And what we have, the first general principle is really, this is the one that if you had to render it down to just one thing, this would be it. Describe what you see. And it's amazing. It sounds simple, but you find with amateur describers that the tendency is to want to describe things that you don't see, to make assumptions or draw conclusions, and we'll talk more about that. But it's describe what is physically observable, like appearances and actions. And sometimes the most difficult thing about doing audio description is remembering that what not to describe. That's really what can make description condescending, insulting, talking down to the user when you're telling them things they already know or things that they can perceive from listening. Or like we have here, describing motivations or intentions or things like that. And again, we'll talk a little more in detail. But pay attention to what should not be described, because that has a lot to do with whether your description will be useful and effective. Mm-hmm. The second general principle Describe that which is most significant or essential in the allotted time. And time is never a describer's friend, really. It's, especially in video description, you just never really have the time unless you're using the stop technology where the video can stop and you can elaborate. It's very difficult in most media situations to describe everything you want to describe in the time that you have. And you never get to describe everything you want to describe, so you have to learn to decide what is essential or critical that would not be understood without the description. Third general principle is do not explain what you think is going on or why. It's not your job as a describer to help the person understand the video and say and explain it. You're just trying to translate what the person doesn't see. The next principle. Do not, and now these next three they kind of all go together in my mind. They might be, I might summarize them as saying, do not interpret the video, but let's look at them individually. Do not describe moods, motives, or reasoning. The reasoning of the characters. If there's characters, if it's a story unfolding, you don't have to explain what people are thinking or what their motives might be for what they're doing or anything like that. Again, those are things you can't literally see. They're conclusions you draw from what you see, and you try not to describe your own conclusions. The principle 5 here is do not inject personal interpretations or opinions. Well, you might think someone is absolutely gorgeous, or you might think this is unattractive, or whatever the case might be. There's, again, along the same lines. It's drawing conclusions, and we try to stay away from that in description because the student watching the video needs to be able to draw their own conclusions like every other student. And principle 6, do not censor the material. This can happen, it tends to happen a lot in entertainment media, but it also happens at the high school and college level in media where there can be, particularly in some sciences or human sexuality courses or other things, sometimes, when someone describes for a person who's blind, they feel that they need to make it a little more palatable, if you will. This doesn't serve the student. You can't really censoring material degrades the quality of the description that you're providing. General principle number 7: do not summarize. This one's a hard one for people to understand sometimes, but I think this example of do not describe a series of specific separate actions or events or images and don't take them and describe them as one. I think a fight scene is the best way to explain that, and I know that's in entertainment media kind of an experience. So in a scene you might want to say, they fight. Well, but that's the sound of a fight is probably already evident to a blind person. It's what is doing what to whom that may not be so obvious. There can be the sound of a train. You might hear it and you say a train passes. Well, a person can hear the train passing. So maybe you could provide some other detail that you can't tell from the sound. What kinds of cars? Are they closed cars, open cars, or what can you see? Or these kinds of details. So summarizing will again degrade the quality of the description you are providing. General principle 8: use the present tense. We're describing what's unfolding right now. It's assumed. Some people will tend to want to use the now, later, these kinds of things. But it's assumed that you're describing what's going on right now. So we use simple present tense to make things simple and easy to understand at a single pass. You don't want to have to create description that a person is going to want to rewind and go, let me hear that again. I didn't quite get that. So using simple present tense is the cleanest way to do that. Principle number 9, use the same name for characters, places, and objects, etc. throughout. So once you refer to someone as a dark-haired woman or a man in a gray suit, or you refer to someone as his mother, or you refer to someone as Josephine, from that point, refer to the person or object the same way. If you start calling things different things, it becomes confusing as to whether you're talking about the same person or object that you were talking about before. Again, a simple principle to understand, but you'll find when you get into doing description, these little simple things start to slip. It's a lot of things to remember, and having a checklist like this can help if you want to review your script for your description after you've created it. General principle number 10, definite articles. This is a useful trade that all the description I've experienced really sticks pretty closely to this. Is you use a when you first encounter something. We see a pail, and then when you see it again, the pail. This helps without a lot of explanation. Helps the listener understand that we're looking at the same pail we saw before, not a different one. So a when you first see something, and the when you see that same thing again. Okay, so those are the general principles. Again, if you think about it, and we don't have the time here to sort of point out exactly how all of those would apply to the various genre of description. How would this apply to describing a parade versus an inaugural event versus a live play? But they do. The next portion of this presentation here are rules that apply specifically to media. These don't really apply necessarily to describing fine art or other museum exhibits or events. Rules for media description. These are lettered as opposed to numbered. And A is do describe scene changes when they're not obvious from the audio. Let the listener know where the action is taking place if the information is not apparent from the dialogue or the background sound. Keep the phrases short, like in the bedroom, at the ballpark, at a stadium, just simple little, usually 2-3 word phrases to let the student know this is taking place somewhere else. Outside even. Sometimes we'll say outside, nighttime, in the morning, daytime, something like that, to indicate something about the new scene. Okay, so the next rule here is do read verbatim words and subtitles that appear on the screen. Text on the screen really isn't accessible in any other way, and so this is one of the rules of video description that you really have to try to fit in. It's difficult in documentaries because there's rarely any room to do it, and you don't want to be trampling over dialogue, as you'll see in a second here. But it is important. We assume that text is written to the screen for a reason, and you want the person to be able to have access to it, and your description provides that access. The rule C here for videos. Do follow the action whenever possible. Allow the action or image or sound effects to occur, then identify them. What this means is your description will occur after what you see. This is a common misunderstanding for people that either haven't experienced description or don't rely on it, basically sighted people that don't really usually need the description. They'll always want the description to occur exactly right on the spot when it's on the screen. But if you take into account that we want the dialogue to be heard, you've got to place the description sometimes either before or after. Placing it after is always preferable. It gives the listener the opportunity to try to understand the video from the sound of the program, and then it provides the answer. If you hear a sound effect, maybe some blind people will get it, some won't, but then the description comes in and says, a can falls to the floor. So the description should follow whenever possible. Once in a while, you're going to have to lead it, which means the description occurs first and then it occurs on the screen, but that's not the preferred default. All right, D. Do not describe over dialogue. I think I should have put this rule much earlier, actually. Do not describe over dialogue. Plain and simple. The dialogue of the program, the student needs to be able to hear it, so keep the description off the dialogue as much as you possibly can. And only if you have to trample the dialogue, you should have a very, very good reason. Like, if I don't get this description in, they're not going to get something critical, so I have to do it. E. Do not describe obvious sound cues. A lot of people will say, the phone rings or the doorbell rings or a dog barks. But these are things that someone can hear, so it really isn't necessary to describe them. You might want to mention who picks up the phone, because maybe that's not obvious, or who answers the door or closes the door. But that, in that case, be clear you're describing it because you're identifying a person, not because you need to fill someone in about what the sound effect was. Next one, F. Do not give away secrets, surprises, and sight gags. You'd be surprised how often this actually happens. Some describers will not take into account the fact that a blind person wants to experience the surprise or to figure out the gag on their own as much as they possibly can, and you're really only providing the minimum essential information that's needed to understand the joke or the surprise, and do it after the surprise is revealed in the video. Let's see. Do not describe camera angles or the TV screen. Again, we're trying to keep. We don't want to be distracting from the video. The description isn't the show. It's not what the person is paying attention. It's not the show itself. The primary focus is not the description. The description is supplemental and provides access, but it isn't the focus. So things like a close-up shot, we're not explaining the cinematography. That's not the point of the description. Or the camera zooms in. These kinds of things are distracting and remind those, you're watching a video, and discourage them from being involved in the program itself. Okay, so with that, all we have left is a list of guidelines for you online. There are tools on how to, tips and tools for providing a description. These online resources, like the ACB has a couple. Their ADP guidelines, their ADP draft of standards, the Audio Description Coalition standards, the description key, one of my favorites from the DCMP. I think it's an excellent tool that you should turn to be able to provide quality description. The Independent TV Commission on guidance on standards, and the Media Access Group has a strategies and techniques document. So those are some resources that you do have online. I'm open for questions if we still have time for that, and I thank you all for listening to this summary of the principles of audio description.
Funding for the VDRDC and this webinar was provided by the U.S. Department of Education under grant number H327J110005. However, the contents of this webinar do not necessarily represent the policy of the U.S. Department of Education, and you should not assume endorsement by the federal government.